But the session is not intended to be a new user guide. Rather, it's designed to address the basic, or sort of it's designed to supplement your the knowledge you have already. Before we do kick off, just run through some housekeeping issues. We have allocated some time at the end of this session for questions. So if you do have any questions, please use the questions toolbar on the side of your screen. One of my colleagues, Tanya Dawson, is with us today, and she'll be moderating the questions for us as well. Just to note, if you do have any specific usability issues, those are best suited for the support@reckon.com or your XPA champion in-house. So I'll look at the agenda today. What we're going to cover is, we'll start off with some XPA 10 updates. Just a brief overview for those who haven't seen the system before, what the XPA 10 version looks like. We'll then go into some faster and more efficient forms of data entry. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the chart mapping toolbox, but also some of the options that are available in the data entry screen. We'll also run through some asset troubleshooting and some of the common queries that we find come through in relation to assets. We'll then look at some financial reporting options, focusing on Jobstreams and financial reporting fields. And at the end, we will have some question time.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So as I said, we'll wrap up with some question time at the very end. So to start off with, what's new in XPA 10? The most significant change in XPA 10 is actually to the XCEDE 10 reporting engine. Now this is covered in a separate webinar, which is available on our website, but basically what you need to know is that the XCEDE 10 reporting engine brings with it a high level of integration with the system. It also is Microsoft Office 2013 compliant. Okay. The major benefit that we'll see is faster report generation, as well as the ability to output to Excel, PDF, or XPS documents directly from the system. What comes with that upgrade to XCEDE 10 is some new sheets as well. You'll also see a refreshed look and feel. Okay. This is an evolutionary step rather than a revolutionary step. Pretty much everything is where you left it before. It just looks a little bit fresher and a little bit newer. There's also a new report that's available in the report selector. This report is the activity by entry type, and we'll run through it in just a few moments. So for our XCEDE Power users, this is what XCEDE 10 looks like. So there's a lot more information available in the actual XCEDE toolbar. XCEDE 10 also brings with it some revised formulas. So if you do have any work papers that use XCEDE formulas or any custom XCEDE sheets, you will need to be sure that you are upgrading your XCEDE sheets or your formulas with the new versions. Full details of the XCEDE 10 upgrade and the new formulas are available in the release notes, also available in Knowledge Base Article 10,000. Looking at the menu refresh, as you can see, everything looks pretty much as it did before, just a little bit fresher, a little bit newer. So for those of you who haven't yet upgraded to XPA version 10, the demonstration that I'll be running today will be in version 10, but if you're still in version 9, you should still be able to see what I'm doing. It's not a whole lot different. It's not a completely foreign concept to you guys. Looking at the new report, the activity by entry type, okay, this is available in our report selector. And what it does is it allows us to separate the trial balance movements or the period movements in the accounts by entry type. Now, entry types are typically journal entries or bank transactions. This is going to be especially useful for our clients using Sync Direct or the chart mapping toolbox, which we're going to outline in this webinar. Most of the imported transactions will actually come in as bank statements. So the major benefit that we're going to see here is that you're going to be able to give your clients a summarized adjusting journal just by preparing this report and seeing and separating out journals from bank statements. As you can see in the screenshot is that we now have description being the account name, opening balance, net movement as a result of journals, net movement as a result of bank statements, and then closing balance. They're the major usability differences in XPA 10. Apart from that, much of the differences are beneath the skin. So let's go into our first productivity upgrade, or our first productivity topic for today. And that is the chart mapping toolbox. So for those that aren't aware, what exactly is the chart mapping toolbox? The toolbox is a tool that we use to manually import general journal transactions from your client's accounting package into XPA. This process eliminates the need to manually code client trial balance movements into the system and reduces the risk of transcription error. Many clients find that this tool provides significant efficiency gains for quarterly and monthly accounting clients. What it does is it enables a full import of all the general ledger transactions from your client's file. And it works across both years that your XPA file works in, so this year and next year. It reduces the level of data entry required, but it also increases the level of detail that we're bringing in. We're not just bringing in the final year or the end of year movements, we're bringing in all the actual details. And as we've said before, we see a huge increase in efficiency across multiple periods because we're now able to import transactions on a monthly or quarterly basis, and we're doing it a lot easier and a lot quicker than we were before. So to access the chart mapping toolbox, what we do, and I'll just open a file that we can work in. The chart mapping toolbox is available using the icon up here. Now that is in between the post entries button and the Reckon Accounts Info button. The text is Account Translate or Data Import. The toolbox can also be accessed via the Data Entry menu and by selecting Transaction Imports. So this is the chart mapping toolbox itself. Now the first step in mapping our charts is actually to create a link between the XPA file that we are working in and the chart mapping toolbox itself. This link is created by hitting the maintenance button and selecting Import XPA Ledger. What this will do is import the ledger that you are currently working in. Now I already have it saved in here, but if I were to delete it, I'd go Maintenance, Import Ledger, and we can see now it shows up down the bottom. Okay. The next step is actually importing the client chart of accounts. Now this is actually going to be done, we're going to be running a Xero file for this, but there are instructions available for just about any accounting package that we support here. So as I said, this version is going to be run from Xero. Now, in terms of Xero, what we need are two different files. Okay, we need a chart of accounts file from Xero and we need a general ledger import. These reports are accessed by clicking the Advisor tab, then Export, and then by selecting APS XPA Accounting as the general ledger chart of accounts option. Now, when we want to export from MyOb will export one text file, and that is a single text file that has a chart of accounts and the general ledger transactions in there. Xero requires two files. So to import the map, what we do is again we hit maintenance and we'll select new this time. We need to give the mapping a name. And we need to tell the system what kind of file we are importing. As you can see from the drop-down, there are a whole list of options here. We're going to choose 0. We then need to select the source file. Now I've saved these files already, but you'll be accessing them from the Advisor Export tab that we just showed. Now I'm going to select the COA file. This only has the chart in it. It doesn't have any of the transactions. So I'm going to hit open. Once I've selected the import button, you can see now underneath my XPA ledger, I have the test case chart of accounts file. Once we've imported the chart of accounts file, we need to start performing the mapping process. The mapping process starts by selecting, so we right-click on the test case and we select it as the from chart. Okay. We then select the XPA file we want to work in, right-click, and select it as the to chart. So what we can see down the bottom of this screen now is that we are going to map from the 0 chart called Webinar Test Case to the XPA chart called A-Person Investments. We now select Map Accounts. For those of you that have used Account Code Translate before, this box would be familiar. What we see on the left-hand side of the screen is the chart of accounts as it appears in our client's file. Okay, so in this case we have the 0 chart of accounts sitting on the left-hand side. The last column in that section is the to code. Okay, and that is the XPA account that we're going to use to map to the specific account in line. On the right-hand side, we have our list of XPA accounts. Now, we can allocate XPA accounts to our chart in one of two ways. We can select the to code box and type the account number. Okay, and just using your down arrow, you can move off and you've added that account. The other option is finding your account on the right-hand side and double-clicking. Double-clicking will add it into the next row or into the selected row and move it down. Now, in the first instance, the mapping of a chart of accounts can take some time. The way that we see it is that it takes about as much time as it takes for you to manually code up a client's chart of accounts that you've printed off before you do the manual data entry into XPA. What's important to note here is that once you've done this mapping, it's saved into the system. From here on in, the only changes that you need to make to the mapping are for new accounts. So while in the first instance it will take you about the same amount of time as manually writing down on a piece of paper what the accounts are or what the mapping should be, next year you'll only have to add the new accounts. Once you've completed your mapping, you'll hit the close button. There is no save button or anything like that. You just need to hit close. So now we've created our mapping. What we now need to do is select our transaction files to be imported. To do that, we'll select the Import tab. We'll see now up the top that the 0 drop-down box has been grayed out and pre-selected for us. Down the bottom, we can still see that our 0 chart is the From chart and our XPA chart is the To chart. We then need to select our transaction source file. Now, the previous file I selected was the COA, being the chart of accounts file. Now I'm going to choose the GL file as at June 2015. We now have a series of drop-down boxes that are available to us. The first is to use the imported tax amount. What this means is that your client's GST coding, as per their data file, will be incorporated into the XPA file. So where there's GST applied to the client data file, GST will be applied in the XPA file. The other option is to use the account tax rates. So that's the second option down. What that will do is refer to your XPA chart and apply GST as per the coding in your XPA chart. We also have an option here that says Post All Entries. This is one that I typically leave unticked because what this will do is automatically post all your imported entries as soon as the import process is complete. I typically leave this unposted as we can then review the transaction imports before actually posting them to the ledger. That way, if we find any issues or any errors in the imported file, we can just delete unposted entries as a batch rather than having to unpost all entries in the file and selectively repost the ones that we want to keep. Down the bottom, we need to choose our date range of imported entries. Now, this example has 1 July 2013 to 30 June 2015 as the default. The reason for that is the period that the file is in. So we know that our files can hold 2 years at a time of active data that we can work in. So what the file is saying that it's going to do now is import each and every single transaction that relates to that time period. Once we're ready, we'll hit our import button, and in a lot of cases the following screen will come up. Now in this instance it will tell me that 55 account codes exist in transaction lines that do not have mappings. Now that is a very high number and that is not your typical case. Okay? In our demonstration we've skipped ahead and we only selected a few accounts for the mapping, which caused this high level. Normally for a monthly or quarterly file, we would expect a handful of accounts to pop up, 5 to 10, in terms of new accounts that your client would have added. If you're finding these kinds of numbers are coming up every single time, your client may not be suitable for the chart mapping toolbox. It may be costing you more time than it's worth. By hitting OK, you'll see that our mapping screen comes up again. What this does now is it shows us which accounts need to be mapped. Okay, so the ones that you see on your screen are the red ones. So suspense, general journal adjustments, visa accounts, GST. These are unmapped. The process of mapping these unmapped accounts is the same as it was before. There's no difference. You just select the relevant box and put the account code in. Something that's important to note though is that once you click into the box for To code, the account code next to it will go black, regardless of whether you put an account code in or not. So you have to be very careful when you're adjusting your mapping that you don't accidentally click and click off. If you do, when you hit close, it will warn you again, saying that there are still some accounts that need to be mapped. Once you've selected, once you've remapped all the unmapped entries, you can close the box. Now, in the example that we have, we can see that we've imported something like 26,000 transactions over the 2-year period. Okay, the case study company that we're using, the test data that we're using, is a trading company with a lot of sales entries. Okay, hence the high number of transactions. Also, we're importing 2 years worth. So typically for a monthly client, it would be, 1,000, 1,500 transactions a month. But what we can see now is that we have access to the detail of all of those transactions rather than just seeing the period end, month end, year end movement. We now have the option, because we chose not to automatically post these entries, we're now in a position to review them before they get posted to our general ledger. So you can see that I've opened up my journal entries box and the status is listed as unposted. Okay, so we can now review the import, edit or delete any entries that are incorrect, and then select post all entries. Now, the case study that we're working off is a Xero case study, and Xero imports all their transactions into the general journal section of the XPA file. If you were to run this same example with a MyOb file, you would find that the transactions go to the bank statements section of the XPA file. This is where you could choose, if you unclicked all types in this box, you could choose bank statements only and post those. You'll also note in this example that my period range says 1 to 24. The file that we are working in is a monthly, so a 12-period file, and I'm posting all or both years worth of transactions. Very important to note that you're not only importing, well, you may not be importing just 1 period worth of transactions. So if you don't change this value to represent all the periods that you've imported, when you hit post, you're still going to see a number of unposted transactions down the bottom, and this may affect the way that you work later on. So that's the chart mapping process. Now, that was the process for a Xero file. So a Xero file requires 2 text files for imports. We actually do have instructions on the APS knowledge base, which I'll go through a little bit later. And it covers just about all the accounting packages that we support, well, especially the major ones. Okay, so going into the knowledge base and asking how to import from MyOb to XPA will bring you up the instructions to import from a MyOb account write file rather than a Xero file or a Reckon Accounts file. It's also important to note that some files, such as MYE files, which again are the files that MyOb exports out of when we are using account write, MYE files are effectively just zip files that need to be renamed. So MYE extension needs to be changed to a zip extension. So those files require some manipulation before that import can be run. Best practice here is to actually delete the source file for those transactions once they're done in order to prevent double entry. So when we run through the example, when you run through this process yourself, you're going to see a message that pops up and says, do you want to delete the source file? Okay. Generally, we recommend that you do, because it reduces or takes away the chance that you're going to re-enter that file. It's important to note you're not deleting your client's transactions at that point. You still have them in their data file. It's just an export a text file that you've used to bring the data into XPA. The other note here is that your chart mappings actually carry over. So if you're going to use Sync Direct, if your practice is looking at using Sync Direct later on in the game, your chart mappings from the chart mapping toolbox will carry over. So you're not going to have to redo all of these. So you can set up your maps now and manually import using the chart mapping toolbox. And when Sync Direct comes in, those mappings will still be available to you. There are some times, of course, where manual data entry is required. And to that end, we're also going to look at some of the ways to make your data entry a little bit more efficient. And to do that, firstly, we're going to look at the show options. Okay, so when we go to XPA, and right-click in the grey area and hit show, this box will come up. Now, I'm not going to go through each and every single one of the options. I'm going to go through the most used ones. The first one is entry type. What you'll notice here is that I have all entries selected as the default. Okay? What this does is it shows up each and every single journal entry for the period selected. Okay? Everything for that period is going to show up on the screen. The option directly above that is unposted entries. So what that will do is it will only print off the unposted, or only show you the unposted entries for that period. Any entries that have been posted to the trial balance will not show up in this screen. Okay? Now, I don't have any unposted entries at the moment, but if I were to create some, okay, you can see they're down as unposted, and I were to close and reopen my screen. Select all entries. We can see now that only the unposted entries have shown up. So we find that some clients find this very useful because it focuses their attention only on the entries that are still to be done, rather than reviewing any old entries using this screen. We can also choose to view only this session. Okay, so if you've had a session where you've manually entered quite a few journals and you want to be able to separate those from this session from other sessions, and that includes posted or unposted, you can choose this session only. Hit OK. You'll see now that my two transactions that I had before have disappeared. That's because they were created last session. So I'll change that back to unposted entries. The other box that I'm going to show here is entry order, as I find that this is also typically customized by our clients. The default here is as entered. So what some people don't realize is that when we create a journal entry in XPA, the time and date of that journal entry is saved into the system. Okay, it doesn't show up anywhere on this screen, but it is saved into the system. So we can actually order our journal entries in the order that they were actually entered into the system, rather than transaction date reference or account. Okay, so what a lot of people don't realize is you don't necessarily need to use your reference number to order your accounts to make sure that they're in chronological order. You can use the as entered option. You can also order by transaction date, which I find is also popular for pulling up year-end ones only. You can choose to order by reference. This is one that most people have used in the past as entry order as entered, because they're using sequential referencing. And I'll explain what that is in a moment when we go through the options screen. But if you're using non-sequential referencing, so you're using staff initials or any other codes as your referencing, you can order by your reference instead. The final option is to sort by account. And what that does is just sorts the entries in this screen in account order, smallest to largest. Now you'll see on the side here, I have the option to save or clear user and save or clear system. Now the reason I have save or clear system on my screen is because on this particular system, I have full admin rights. Most users will only see save and clear user. The difference between save user and OK is OK will only save these options for the current session. So if I were to save these options as I did before by hitting OK and close out of the journal entry screen, when I reopened the journal entry screen, it would revert back to my settings, my original settings. Alternatively, if these settings are ones that you want to keep across the board, you can choose Save User. And what this will do is it will change your screen only, so that when you open up your journal entry screen, it shows up in the order that you prefer. So that's the show options. If I right click again and select options this time. Now I'm not going to run through each and every one of these tabs because not each and every one of them is particularly relevant to what we're going to talk about. The most useful part of this whole options screen is the ability to skip input on certain data fields. What skip input does in this situation is actually allow you to tab directly over a field and skip to the next one in line. Okay. The reason why I personally like this one is because it stops me from doing things like entering account codes or references into the date box and then causing errors when I try to tab off and edit the date. So you could choose to repeat the last date if you're doing journal entries on specific dates rather than year-end date. You can choose a constant month and year. You can choose a fixed date, and this is typically the default, and it's typically the last date in the period. Or you can choose no date. Okay. Now, you still need a date to actually enter the journal, but what you can say is that I don't want any date to show up in the box initially as a default. So these are default settings at the moment. Now, typically I would use fixed date and I would skip input, meaning that if I'm using my tab key to move across the fields, I don't have the option generally of editing the date. What we'll see later is that if I click into that box, that grayed out box as it will be, I can change it manually. But it requires me to actually click on that box rather than just tab into it. The reference tab. Now again, we can see we have things like repeat last reference number or increment last reference number, which I find is popular. I also see constant reference number a bit. Now constant reference number could be used either when you're preparing year-end journals and you want the references to be the same, or if you have an XPA file that is being touched on by a number of users. One thing that we've found is useful in the past is selecting constant reference number and putting it, for example, as someone's initials, and again selecting skip input. I found that this is particularly useful when you're dealing with offshore type arrangements where you have an offshore provider, and it's a good setting to have turned on. That way you know which member of the team is currently editing these journals. The option on the right-hand side is reference validation. And what that does is it tells us, do we want to mandate that a reference should be unique or not unique when we save a journal entry. So if you're using automatic reference numbers or incremental reference numbers, you may seek to turn on unique validation to make sure that no two journals have the same reference. Obviously, we wouldn't choose this if we were going to use a constant reference number. I find that some clients like to turn on constant amount in their data entry screen, and the reason for that is it allows them to very quickly add a negative for the other side of the journal entry. But I don't think I've ever seen someone choose skip input for the account or the amount item for that matter. One that I do see, however, especially when we're talking about skipping fields, is GST. Now, many of the files that you deal with have already had GST applied during the year when you're dealing with VASs and stuff like that. So you'll find that their Zero package or their MyOb package or their Reckon Accounts package will have all the GST calculations in there. All you want from an XPA point of view is the journals. So what you can do is you can actually choose your GST entry options. The default here is use the account rate code, meaning that if your account has a GST code in it, that code would automatically pop up. You can choose a constant rate code. Usually you would use this to stipulate that none of them are going to be GST applicable. Or you can choose no rate code. Okay. That closes the rate code box. Okay. And what we can do is we can also choose to skip the GST amounts, the net amount, and the rate code input box in our screens. Effectively, what this will do now is speed up our data entry when we're just using the keyboard, when we want to tab between all the fields and hit enter to post or to save the entry. Again, we can choose to hit OK or save user. I'm going to save user and hit OK. So what you'll see now on my screen is that my date box is grayed out, as is my reference box. If I hit tab, my tab key automatically takes me to my account field. So if I were to enter bank fees, you'll now see that it has completely skipped the GST fields because I've decided that all my GST is done in my client's file. I'm just performing some data entry. Okay. Now, all I've done here is hit enter. What you'll see is that my cursor has automatically moved to the account field. It's skipped date and it's skipped reference. What that means is I can now choose reference and change it if I want to. The final one that I'll show you here under my options is the description. Okay. Sometimes I find that clients like to choose repeat last description to keep the descriptions constant across a series of journals, but also to force users to think about the descriptions they're putting in. It's easy to ignore a description field when it's blank. It's harder to ignore it when you can plainly see that it has the wrong description in it. And that's what they're banking on when they choose that. So that's the data entry options that are available. This is the section that I really like because it lets you play around with what works best for you and you're not changing anyone else's user settings, just your own. and you can set up the system in a way that works best with you. If you're quicker on the keyboard, tabbing through and using the keyboard entirely, setting up your skip input fields will really speed up the way that you work. Having a look at assets now. Now, assets is a very big topic, so we're not going to go very deep into it in this session. What I will go through is some of the common questions or issues that we find. A few things to note. Firstly, our tax and book ledgers are fully independent of each other, and they have to be maintained separately, and a lot of people forget that. We need to make sure when we're maintaining our ledgers that the tax and book ledgers are both being maintained. Okay, and this is regardless of whether the ledgers are integrated with the trial balance or not. We also need to remember that when we're using our asset ledgers and when we're using our integrated asset ledgers, that all purchases and sale proceeds should be run through the asset suspense account, which is usually account 970. Okay? One of the biggest issues that I find with assets that have broken in people's XPA files is that they've started journaling directly to the asset accounts rather than using 970. If you find that your asset code in XPA, in your ledger, in your asset ledger, is different from your asset code in the trial balance, you can use the account code translate function. Now, the account code translate function is available from the chart mapping toolbox. It's the same box. So if I were to open the chart mapping toolbox again, I choose Actions and Translate. For those of you who have seen the account code translate box before, we can scroll down to our assets and recode. And we can match those up with what's in our asset ledger. The other main issue that I find when I visit clients with assets is that they are wanting to delete assets and they're not able to. Now, once an asset has been entered into the system, it really shouldn't be deleted, even once the asset has been written off. A lot of people forget that we carry 10 years worth of balance history in XPA and 10 years worth of transaction history. So even if you disposed of an asset 3 years ago, there's still details of that asset sitting in the file. Okay, so we really shouldn't delete it. There are, however, some situations that we would delete an asset, and most commonly that is in the current year. Okay, so usually it's when we've created an asset and we have allocated it to the wrong group. What we need to do is actually delete that asset and re-enter it into the correct group. So the way that we do that is we go into our asset ledger. Now what we have here is an asset, and it's going to be purchased in the current year. I've entered it and I've got depreciation in there. So I'll save it, synchronize. This is about the stage that most people get up to. If I go to delete this asset now, it won't let me do it because it has entries and a period balance. So the first thing that you need to do is back out that depreciation. Now, what you'll notice as I'm going through this demonstration is that there are a lot of warnings. Okay, the system gives you plenty of chances to realize that you're entering a zero rate of depreciation, and that doesn't quite seem right. What you'll see now is I don't have a depreciation movement. Synchronize my ledger. Just to be safe, I usually close it and reopen. I now need to remove the purchase price and the cost entry from my accounts. So again, I'll select my cost and hit 0. Go into my tax ledger. As you can see, I'm getting a lot of messages asking me to confirm all these 0 balances. Depreciation rate 0, yes. Initial cost 0, yes. Okay. You can see now that everything is down to 0. I'll synchronize again. And now I'll hit delete. What you'll see now is that only the cost account has entries, but it's not telling me that I have a period balance anymore. As soon as that period balance is gone, I can get rid of it. So I'll hit OK. And it asks me, do you want to delete the asset? And I'll select yes. So now we can take that asset and we can recreate it in another group. What you will notice though is that when we look at our ledger, that I still have cost and depreciation entries for the asset. They've all been reversed out, and if we look at the trial balance, there's no carrying value of that asset. Okay, there's nothing in 970 asset suspense, and there's nothing in the asset section. Our advice is leave those journals there because it provides a history of what actually happened. The biggest issue that we see with assets and asset ledgers not balancing is because someone's gone in and deleted the entries from the journals, okay, and it's thrown the system out. So the easiest thing to do is just keep all the system created entries in there and do everything through the asset ledger. The final thing I'm going to show you with assets are some of the options that are available in the admin tool. So those super users who have access to the admin tool. There are 3 options that I'm going to run through. The first is to unintegrate the asset ledger. So that's the middle option in the box. Your ledgers are typically integrated, so your asset ledger is updated and it updates your trial balance. To unintegrate the asset ledger is to remove that link. So what it says is that my updates from my asset ledger will no longer update my trial balance. This is usually done when a client is no longer using the asset ledger. They might use a separate program, a separate accounting program that manages assets, and it's usually done as a precursor to the option above it, which is remove non-integrated asset ledger. So if you want to delete an asset ledger from your XPA file, you need to first unintegrate that asset ledger, then remove the asset ledger. Once that's done, you can remove the assets. Another option that we see coming up in the assets administration tool is to copy assets. Typically this is done when a business is sold from one entity to another and all the assets need to move with it. So it needs to move from one entity to another entity. By using copy assets, we can actually do that and copy assets from one ledger to another. These are options available in the XPA administration tool, and as such should really only be done by your XPA champion users. And if not done by them, definitely done with the knowledge of them, just in case you need to go and refer to support. The final topic for today is XCEDE reports and customizing some of the options that are available to you in your XCEDE reporting job streams. So for those of you who aren't aware, job streams are just a list of reports that are about to be prepared. so a list of spreadsheets that are about to be created. Most of us are aware of Jobstreams as our compliance job stream, so preparing a set of accounts, or our divisional job stream, preparing a set of divisional accounts. All we're creating in each instance is an Excel spreadsheet with a number of sheets inside it. What we can do when we do that is that we can actually customize the job stream to suit our client's needs. We're not bound by that job stream. So what you'll see on the screen here is I have a list of job streams and the files that relate to it. My client also likes to see something graphical, so I'm going to add a sheet. Now if I select template, there is a whole list of sheets that are available to us. There are some sheets in here that are not attached to any job streams. Okay, so you can create a custom job stream that has different sheets in it. So I'm going to select the current results chart and add it to the bottom of my job stream. What I can now do is I can also say I don't want a director's declaration because this isn't for year-end compliance purposes, so I'll delete the director's declaration, I'll delete the compilation report, and I'll delete the changes in equity. I also use a corporate cover page, so I won't use the cover page or the index. So all I have now is my income statement, balance sheet, and chart. What I can do now is I can save that as a custom job stream against this chart. Okay, so I can say and change my description to client-specific management report. Okay, and I hit save. What this will do is it will save a job stream to this ledger. Okay, again, don't worry that you're going to change the template because you won't. You're just saving the job stream to this ledger. So if I go to Ledger Job Streams now, I have my management job stream and I hit run. This brings us to the options that are available. Now I can choose not to generate the notes and not to generate note numbers just to get those out of the way. And I can also choose whether or not to activate XCEDE 10, which depends on your admin rights. So here I have now my custom job stream with my income statement, balance sheet with no references to the notes or notes section, and my custom chart. Now this is a standard chart. It's available in the Australian standards. New Zealand standards do have a different set of sheets, but this is available in the Australian standards. So to edit your job streams, you're just going into your job stream section and then adding any sheets by double-clicking that you want in there. You can also make changes to your job streams using the financial reporting fields. So those reporting fields can be used to do things like remove page numbers, require accounts for 1 year only, change or sort of specify that it was a part year file if it was the first year of trading. You can also do things like change the text in your reports and declarations. So a lot of your statements of accounting policies typically use the financial reporting fields for that text. Just a note, if you change any of these financial reporting fields, you're only changing them against that particular ledger, not the template. To get them back to template, you just hit the refresh button and choose the template to refresh the fields. Now I've also expanded the compilation report so that we can see there is one very common error that comes up in which your date shows up as 1 January 1900. That error is in your text reports and declaration field. You choose the relevant report, and there's a question down the bottom there that says, do you want an alternative to the standard formatted date? This error pops up when you've selected no and have nothing in the box below. That produces a 0 result, which in Microsoft Excel date speak is 0 January 1900. The typical fix is to change this to yes and have dated and allow the client to write their own date in there. If you do need any more support from us, that's the official program. There's the knowledge base, which is at myaps.apsadvanced.com, which is available here. This is an extensive database. This is where we find our import instructions for MyOb, Zero, etc. But also any errors that you find. You can copy and paste the text of the error message into your search field and search that way. Okay, it's more detailed than our help file. We're also running more and more of these webinars. To find out your upcoming training and events, find some recorded webinars. So this webinar will go up in about a week's time, or book a consultant to come out and see you. That is done through this website. Now if we click on the upcoming webinars, we can see that we've got ones coming up for PDF docs and tax reporting. We can also select recorded webinars. I mentioned earlier XPA 10, new features and enhancements. There's the video for that there. We also have a video on XPA to tax integration, tax, PM10, and activity statements. You can also email support if none of these avenues works for you. We also recommend that you review the help and release notes that are available within XPA and in fact all of our products. I'll open the floor now to any questions. The question boxes seemed a little bit quiet, which hopefully is a good thing. But if anyone has any questions now, we are going to stay online for at least a few minutes to answer any questions that anyone may have.